Well, when I first went to work there, I think I got a nickel an hour. Yeah, that's 50 cents a day, $3 a week. See, this was just a small packing company. And here's something else that might surprise you. At this plant, they throwed livers, hearts, and heads and feet and what have you. What they didn't want to save for their own, for their immediate customers, they'd throw it in the river. And neighbors, they'd blow a whistle when they got ready to throw away what they weren't going to use when they got through killing, see. And they'd blow a whistle, and all the women from the neighborhood would come up to the sewer that emptied into the river, and they'd catch that stuff as it come out. And they'd come up there with tubs, buckets, and everything else, and pitchforks and grab hooks.
A Midwestern river town, but not in Frank's case, the carefree youth of Tom Sawyer. Conveniences common today were yet to be invented. The non-working and working poor were often no more than dray animals in the service of the wealthy, to be used as servants in their lavish homes, as craftsmen in their shops, as laborers in their factories. This was a time before legislative protections, before child labor laws, before workmen's compensation. Into this kind of working world, Frank Ellis was born.
Frank Alexander Ellis, and forget that Alexander.
How come forget the Alexander, Frank?
I don't like it. Never did. I never did use it.
Yeah, I know. But Alexander's not a bad name.
I use the A sometimes as an initial, but I never use the name.
How come you didn't like Alexander?
I don't know. I just never did like it from a kid on up.
How about, tell us, where were you born, Frank?
I was born in Gentry County in the state of Missouri, on the banks of the Grand River in 1888.
That's a while
In a
back.
log cabin, by the way.
Is that right? Well, let's see now. You've been in early strikes. You're working when you're 8 years old. How about your father? You spoke earlier of your dad.
Yes.
In context of being in the packing house. Was he always a packing house worker?
No. See, he was a farmer, and he'd hit his leg on a plow, and what they called at that time white swelling set in. And he had a hole eaten through his ankle here, both ways, through each side and then up through this side. And he had a hole, had half his shin eaten off, and a hole through his knee. He had to walk with a crutch, and he couldn't use that foot at all. And then he went to work after the old Henry Krug plant was sold out and closed up. Why, he went to work for Swift and Company, and he fell. A grease pipe busted above him, and he started to jump out from under that grease pipe, and his foot slipped and he fell into a sewer there and broke that bum leg all to pieces, and they had to have it cut off, and that killed him. He died from that.
Well, then if he died as a result of an industrial accident, what kind of compensation did you receive?
There was no compensation of any kind. Dad went into the county hospital. He died there. He was buried in what we'd call today Potter's Field in a county graveyard or cemetery. And that's all there was to it. No compensation of any kind.
Well, after Dad died and you were trying to help out, I understand Mother got married again.
Yes, she got married short while after that. And then I left home. I didn't like my father-in-law. He's a good guy, all right. But I just didn't like him. I just couldn't see the idea of someone taking Dad's place. And kind of got under my hide, and so I smarted off at him, and Mother gave me a whipping for it. And so I just walked out and left town. And I was gone for over 5 years before she knew where I was at.
So then that's the first time you were really on your own then?
Yeah.
You're really out in the world on your own.
Yeah, see, we lived on 5th Street then, or right along 5th Street, and the railroad track ran up 5th Street, the Burlington Railway. And so I just, there happened to be a freight train on the track, and it just whistled for the crossing. I ran out and jumped in a boxcar, and the way I went.
Heading somewhere.
Well, I didn't have any schedule. I didn't know where the hell I was at or where I was going. I didn't care. I did for a while. Yeah, I got pretty lonesome 2 or 3 times. But I toughed her out. And I'd take a job here doing something. Well, I was just a kid and I couldn't get too many jobs, you know. But I could pick up light work here and there. And so I got a job on a shrimp boat. And my job was putting skivers in their snappers, you know. And so I worked around Boston there for a while, and then I went up into Maine and got a job on a boat up there. And I worked there, I guess, for about a month or 2. And then from that on, I just drifted everywhere. I was going on south. I went down into Florida and on over to California, and then back up the coast again, the other coast. And
well, that must have been about the time you were beginning to get interested in unionism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hell, I belonged to the Cook, Waiters, and Waitress Union. Then I joined several different unions, and if there was a union, I joined it, because I'd learned that in early life, you know, I believed in it.
By World War I, the industrialization that began in Europe exploded upon the American economy. The owners of this bursting empire accumulated unbelievable wealth and power. But the non-owners, working men, women, and children, were beginning to struggle for their fair share of the wealth they helped create. But few of the strikes of that period were won by labor. Among the losers was an army of transient workers who, like Frank, traveled from field to forest to factory, meeting the constant demand for concentrations of uncommitted labor. Usually living without local or family ties, these men grew to depend upon each other for support. It was logical, then, that they should be among the first to understand the true meaning of union solidarity.
Now, the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world, rather radical organization, you say, began in 1905.
Yeah.
And there have been other labor unions existed prior to that.
Yes.
But what was the philosophy of the Wobblies? What made them different than the old AFL?
Well, the AFL was organized by craft, and the Wobblies were organized by economic power, one big union. See, for instance, all foodstuff workers belonged to one union. Didn't make any difference whether you was a candy maker or a cook and waiter and waitress or what have you. You belonged to foodstuff workers, which is 460. Anything in the food industry belonged into one organization. And transportation was another organization, but all within one union.
It's not like the carpenters in one union, the bricklayers in another union.
No, they all work together. You call out one group. If it wasn't enough, you called out the other group.
What do you mean called out, Frank?
Well, I mean, if you had to go on strike, say, for instance, well, say the United Packing House workers had to go on strike. Then they'd call out all the rest of the unions that was connected in that particular branch. And if that wasn't enough, then they called the next branch that would be effective within that, transportation or something else. See?
Sounds like there's going to be a lot of people out of work in a strike like that.
Well, they would be, but there'd be a hell of a lot of industry shut down, too, you know.
Didn't the Wobblies have a procedure for when they put a Wobbly in jail to...
Well, they'd just go down and hold meetings. See, they'd take a soapbox with them or a box of some kind, and they'd get to starting an argument and get a bunch starting together around them, and then they'd set the soapbox down and get up on the soapbox and start preaching unionism, you know. And then the first thing you know, here'd come a cop and knock one off in the soapbox and take him to jail. Another one would get up and he'd knock him off. And it kept the cops busy, but we filled the jails. And then when we'd fill the jails, they'd battleship in jail and holler through the bars at everybody on the street and get them together, and we'd have whole meetings that way.
What do you mean battleship on the bars?
Well, take a tin can, you know, and rub it along on the bars, and it gets people on the outside to hear it, as well as the inside. Then a gang would gather, want to know what the hell's going on up there, and then you get some mouthpiece to get up there and start talking. See?
The 30s, the Great Depression, was a time when labor in general, and industrial workers in particular, made enormous gains. Although large portions of the labor force remained unorganized, unions were gaining power. The fire of worker unrest was fueling a new breed of labor leader. John L. Lewis, Phil Murray, David Dubinsky, Walter Reuther. In this era of strikes and riots, many great American corporations found themselves bargaining with labor for the first time. And one of the early figures facing management across arbitration tables in Minnesota was Frank Ellis.
What did you do from those days, 28, 29, 30, 31?
I usually had a job working at something in the packing house or someplace. I went to work at Hormel's over here in 28. Hormel's down at Austin. I run a gang there at Hormel's for 5 years.
But now, let's get this straight. You talk about you had a job here, and you had a job there, and you had a job here, and yet you say that people wouldn't hire union people, management wouldn't hire union people.
If they knew it.
How come they always kept hiring you in all these places?
Well, I kept moving from town to town and state to state. See, I started out in St. Joe, Missouri. And I've been all over the United States and Canada and Hawaii and Puerto Rico, just running from place to place, you know. Now, when I came into Austin,
that's the Hormel plant.
The Hormel plant, see. So I wanted to go up and see the Hormel plant, and someone said, "Do you know Harry Tweedell?" And I said, "Yeah, I know his brother." And so, well, I did know his brother. I'd never met Harry before, but I went in and told Harry who it was and told him that I knew his brother. I'd worked for Jack Morris, his half-brother. And so Harry took me up then and showed me all through the plant, and I find out they're not saving their own casings. They're shipping them away green. So I asked him, "Why, Christ, there's a lot of money in casings. Why don't you save your own casings?" And he said, "What do you mean there's a lot of money in them?" So I told him. And he said, "Well," he said, "we've got ours contracted out with," I think he said Bechstein, either Levi or Bechstein casing. I forget which it was now. And he said, "How do you know there's money in them?" I said, "Well, for Christ's sake, I've worked on casings all my life. I ought to know. I know all your inspectors and all that." And so he said, "Well, give me your address where you're going in Omaha." And he said, "Our contract will be up here before long, and I may contact you and give you a proposition."
Well, Frank, if you were working with Hormel in renovating their casings department so that they could make some more money, This kind of makes you a management man.
No, listen, I was looking for a job, and I wasn't particular what kind of job it was because I was broke. And so this was a chance for me to make a few dimes, and I took it. Now, as far as my men were concerned, there were men that I'd picked. They knew their business. They didn't need a boss, see. And so that's the way that I started out with Hormel. I went there looking for a job. I got a job. And even though I was manager of the department, it didn't mean that I'm a big shot, because I never pretended to be.
Well, now I've heard some stories, Frank, about Hormel, and this is perhaps, of all the things you've done, this one perhaps stands out, is the biggest achievement, that is organizing that one big union down there where you had that whole town unionized. And I've heard some people say that even when you were a boss in Hormel, you had a plan to organize Hormel into a union, and you were infiltrating that plan.
Well, what I was doing, see, I'd send out and get rebels that I knew from other towns to come in and go to work. And I'd work them during the rush season, see. Then when it come to layoff time, instead of laying them off, I'd go to some other boss and say, here, I've got a good man, and I hate like hell to lay him off. Can you use him? And I'll take him back as soon as business starts up, when we start killing hogs again. And I'd place him in the plant and scatter him out. Well, he was an old union man. He knew what to do. I didn't have to tell him. He knew his idea was to get in there with the gang and to get them emotionally moved so that they'd be ready to organize when the time came. And so eventually we got the break. The time came. The people were dissatisfied, so they go out on strike. And, well, first they just walk off from the job and call a meeting, see, and I'm invited down there to speak at that meeting.
What made them, now these people hadn't been walking off jobs before. What caused them to walk off the job at that particular time, Frank?
Agitation. Our county attorney down there got on the telephone and called the governor. Governor Floyd B. Olson was governor then. And called the governor and said, Governor, said, these workers down here got clubs in their arms and tears in their eyes. Said, somebody's going to get hurt, and we're afraid Hormel's children's going to get hurt. We want you to send the troops down here. Well, now, Hormel, I don't think had asked for troops at all himself. It was just the county attorney. And he'd been on the platform with us when we were organizing, you know. We thought he was working with us until I come in and caught him pulling this stunt. Well, anyhow, the governor calls me. And he said, Frank, what's going on down there? And I said, nothing to get excited about. I said, Governor, we've got the plant tied up. We've taken it over. He said, you know, you've violated every law under the known to God or man, or words to that effect. And I said, yeah, I suppose, but they don't have a jail down here big enough to hold all of us. But I said, we haven't created any violence. Nobody's been hurt, and nobody will be hurt unless they attempt to go in that plant. And I said, now, I heard the county attorney calling you over the phone, telling you to send troops down here. And I said, it'd be the worst thing you could do, because you'd create a riot.
Wasn't there some trouble in one of the departments that walked out that triggered that?
Well, yeah, that was on the hog kill, see.
So when that one department walked out, you really had no choice but to call a general strike.
Well, here's what happened that caused the strike. See, we took a strike vote up at the Union Hall, and they voted unanimously to walk out, but they was to leave it up to me when they should go, see. But after the meeting's over, we have a bunch of guys that had got too much to drink, you know, and so they go up on the night gang up in the sheep kill, and they pull the sheep kill out, get them to go out right then. Oh, we didn't want the damn strike then. We wanted to use it as bargaining leverage, see. But when they got them to go out, the only thing it could do was to call the whole gang, because if you forced them to go back to work and then didn't accomplish anything, the rest of them wouldn't have went out. So we had to call a strike right then. And that's what we done. We called a strike and throwed our pickets around the plant. And this was in bad time, too. It was in December, you know, cold. And November or December, I forget, in November, I believe it was.
Still cold.
Yeah, it was in November. And, but we called a strike, and we was only out about 3 days, I think it was, and before we got it settled.
Now you say you went in there and you led all members of the office staff and even Hormel himself out of the plant, and you took over the plant.
Now, I didn't. Workers
Yes,
did,
the workers.
yeah. And we didn't get much out of it, but we did get some wages. We got 4 or 5 cents an hour. I forget what it was now. And, but that prevented the strike, in one sense of the word, and it gave us enough publicity to build that union overnight, just like that, see.
But you, at the same time that you were organizing those Hormel workers, you were organizing other people too, weren't you?
Yes, yes, well, we'd got the Hormel workers practically organized, and then we started organizing cooks, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, barmaids, and automobile workers and truck drivers and what have you. And we organized under the Independent Union of All Workers.
Now that's your name. You created that.
That's right, yeah. See, I was working under the Wobblies at that time, carrying credentials for the Wobblies. But I was afraid to put them in the Wobblies because we'd been wrecked so many times, you know. So I'm going to come as near to it and under the same pattern and see what happens. And so we set it up as Independent Union of All Workers, and we got them organized solid, and when we were once organized, we were the power.
Thomas, give us an idea of the breadth of that organization.
Well, see, we started out under the old Independent Union of All Workers, and we organized Albert Lee, we organized Mason City, we organized Faribault, we organized South St. Paul, we organized Winona, and then we finally went into CIO, see, and got the CIO to finance us to carry on organization work in the meat packing industry, because that's one of the things that we wanted to get organized. I had met with Phil Murray and John Lewis, and, oh, wait a minute, I know well, there's about 6 of them altogether. I can't think of their names. But anyhow, they talked to me about setting up CIO. See, CIO wasn't in existence yet then. And so they organized CIO after I come back from Washington. And, well, they'd explained to me that they could furnish the money to organize packing. And so after they set up CIO, then I talked with John L. in Chicago. And he told me, he said, here, said, we can set up packing for you. If you want to come into the CIO and throw your forces in with us.
But you, when you got into the CIO now, and they made you a district director of the packing house workers. That took in a couple states around here?
5 states.
5 states.
I was just president of the Austin local at that time. Well, then, shortly after that, I get a call from, who the hell was it? Somebody calls me and wants to know if I'll go up and speak at the district. They're having a meeting of stockyards workers, I believe it was, and they want to know if I'd go up to South St. Paul and speak to that group of workers, and I agreed to. Well, they had well, I forget what their names are now, but they had about 5 different fellows from CIO in there watching to see how that was progressing and who was handling it. And Roy Franklin was the district director then. He'd been appointed. And so I spoke that night and intended to come back home, back to Austin. And Jim Ritchie and Pud Ballard, they were national representatives. Them and 2 or 3 others got a hold of me. Here, Frank, we want you to stay here and take over. You act as district director up here. And so the next day, I think it was the next day, they transferred Franklin to Chicago and had me to take over his job. Well, then I went ahead and followed through on it and done a pretty good job of building it up. And then we set up the International Union, and I'm a elected international vice president in the International.
Well, that was quite an accomplishment, being a vice president of the International Union, especially in those rather hectic days of the early CIO organization.
Frank Ellis died in Austin, Minnesota on August 17, 1976, after 82 years of service to his only cause, the labor movement. It's our sincere hope that this document may become a small part of his memory.
And the worker's the producer of all wealth. And they're getting the least money out of it. See, the farmer produces all of our foods and what have you. And the worker reproduces it. And between the farmer and the worker, all wealth is made. And they should have a little better share in that wealth, in my opinion, than they're receiving today. So you have men now like, well, they told about Nixon saying, oh, it's nothing to raise $1 million, see. Well, if $1 million is a darned easy raise, why don't they start giving a little more of that to the working people and the producing people of the world so that they can live a little better? It sounds radical to those who's got the money and may lose a little profits that they're making, but it sounds darn nice to workers who's been hungry and those that are unemployed, because you could create jobs for more people.